Hello, and welcome to episode number 336 of the Board Game Barrage podcast. I am Kellen, the red tank, and Neelan and Mark, you are also here, right?
Yes, I am Neelan, the orange tank.
You have tank colors. They were assigned to you at birth.
I'm pretty sure I chose mine, despite your insistence that it was incorrect.
I'm still right about that, Neelan, as many times as you bring it up. Today on the podcast, we're going to talk about mistakes in board games. Not our triumphs and our mistakes, because we've never made them, but are mistakes in board games fun? The common aphorism, mistakes make the game better. Keep playing through it. But are they?
Dun, dun, dun.
But before... Oh, dun, 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 dun. Is that sort of like is there a uniform dun dun dun, you know what I mean? Like all movies use the same one, like the Wilhelm scream, you know?
There's definitely one that was like the cliched one, which was like, I mean, I think of as the dramatic chipmunk version, which is dun dun dun.
Right.
Yeah, because I think I added more beats to it than just three.
Yeah.
So there's some variation here, Mark.
It was a remix. You know?
But it's universal language now, right? Like all humandom.
It's dun dun dun, parentheses, the Kellen remix, close parentheses.
No. I'm not inserting myself here. I have a big ego, but not that big. But okay, before we do that, we're going to talk about the games that we have played. Mark is going to take us to space with the Space Bees of Apiary. I am going to take us to Fantasyland with the Wizard's Cup. 2 wizards, 1 cup to win in the game. And Neelan will stay in Fantasyland, but now a much different stylized Fantasyland with Wroth. Continuing the lineup of board games that sound like you should say Gesundheit afterward. What was the last one?
I remember there was one.
I mean, there's a whole GIF series. That whole
yeah.
series.
Oh, yeah.
But it was pretty recently.
I thought so too.
Wroth being W-R-O-T-H.
That's it.
Wroth. And Neelan backed it, gave them hundreds of dollars on Kickstarter because he wanted a copy of Wroth. All right. Mark, kick us off with the bees. Everybody loves honey. You know, you got to eat it local, though. But how does that work with apiary? Because if you eat it local, then you don't get allergies.
No, so you'd have to be in space.
Yeah, you'd be like on Mars eating it locally there. It depends on what planet you're on. Because these are indeed
Is that canon
bees.
for the game?
That is canon. That is scripture in this game. So yes, Apiary, 2023, Stonemaier.
Stonemaier religious track.
That's right. I'm trying to get this as controversial as possible. So yes, this is designed by Connie Vogelman, who also was the designer of Wormspan, with pretty striking art by Kwanchai Moria. The art does its best to get across the interesting theme of the game, the aforementioned bees in space. So this game posits a world where humans, I guess, are no longer around, and bees have become the dominant species and are going around colonizing the universe. You play as one of the...
Wait,
that's
canon too?
Mistakes.
Mark, you're telling me that the rule book starts like the humans are dead? You know what I mean?
I didn't...
The humans are
okay, speaking of mistakes, this whole episode is going to be about mistakes, and we're making mistakes, or I'm making mistakes already. I will have to admit that I just extrapolated the story based on the cover and based on the space bees.
great.
This is not...
funny bit if we just kept all the mistakes in this episode.
Oh, well, that would make my
be
life
good.
a lot easier, but there is no chance for doing that. There is no chance for doing that. Anyhow... So, yes, space bees. Bees have taken over. Bees are the main species. Humans are done. Bees are going around colonizing the universe. That may be 100% wrong, but I can't imagine it is that wrong. And if the theme is that important to you to play apiary, then I would encourage you to read about it before making any purchase, despite how glowing or negative this review is. So if the lore is going to be important, please read ahead. Anyhow, back to the game itself. So this space battle that I'm positing takes the form of a worker placement game. The only true way to conquer the universe. But instead of workers, you'll be, perhaps unsurprisingly, placing these fantastic little bee meeples. Actually, these meeples are sort of the crux of the entire game. So what makes them unique is that each bee meeple is this four-sided beeple. Beeple, yes. I think actually they are referred to as beeples, or I saw somebody referring to them as beeples. Yeah. I see that Neelan has been reading the manual. But yes, I'm not going to be using the word beeples. I will be using bee meeples. These bee meeples are four-sided. And the important thing is that each of the four sides has a number 1 through 4 on each of the sides. And the strength at which you place your worker will indicate how powerful you can take the action at a given space. So, for example, there's a section on the board where you can fly around getting resources. The higher the number, the more spaces you can move around. There's another spot where you can make conversions. The higher the number that the worker you place there is, the more conversions you can make, for example. There are a couple of interesting twists there. The first is that there isn't any blocking of spots per se. If anyone moves into an occupied spot, the result is that the bee that is on the spot gets bumped off, returned to the owner, who can then spin up the bee to the next level and then use it later in the round. So if I bump off Kellen's level 3 bee because I want to take the action that it's currently on, he gets the bee back, bumps up to level 4, and can use it again that round. Speaking of level 4 bees, which are again the highest level of worker they can get to, they will unlock unique, very powerful abilities on each of the different spots on the board. This becomes a really important thing to consider in the game where you're going to be placing these powerful level 4 workers. And to go back to the bumping aspect I talked about earlier, whenever a level 4 worker is bumped, they go into what's called hibernation, which is one of the timers of the game. Once a certain number of hibernations has been taking place across all the players, the game will end. And then any hibernated worker, again, any worker that's level 4 that has been bumped off, they are sort of taken out of your pool, they're into reserve, and you can try to get them back later as a level 1 worker. I've only mentioned a couple of the 6 total worker placement spots. I mentioned you can travel around getting income, and there's another spot where you can do conversions. But there's a couple other spots I should probably mention. The first is a spot where you can add tiles to your own personal beehive that is like your own player board. These tiles do a number of different things. There are 3 basic general types. There's one that improves your income and your storage of resources. There's another type that give you passive abilities, and there's a third type that give you one-time pretty large bonuses. There's another worker placement spot where you can usually only place level 4 workers to access them, but they give you a unique end game scoring ability that is available only to you. So it's another sort of these things you add to your hive, but is a end game scoring ability and basically will determine the way you're going to be playing the rest of your game because you're going to try to maximize that tile as much as possible. As I've mentioned before a couple times on the show recently, I found myself drifting a little bit away from what I would call standard vanilla point salady Euros. And I have to admit that that was a concern of mine as I was reading the rules for Apiary in preparation of teaching and playing it. And while it definitely is in the ballpark of one of those kind of games, I'm not going to say that it's definitely not the type of game. I was happy to see that it does some things that I enjoyed that break the tropes of those kind of games a little bit. A really clear example of this is the bumping mechanism that I mentioned earlier. It becomes a positive interactivity with other players because, you are giving them a benefit by bumping their workers off and having them more powerful. But you can also use it as an opportunity to be aggressive against your opponents. You could try to strand your opponents and not bump them off to force them to take a whole turn to get all their workers back. So that's another aspect of the game. If you have no workers in your possession, you can take a turn to grab them all off the board, spin them all up, but that's your entire turn. So you can strand your opponents and then force them to do that as a full action. Or if, for example, you know that your opponent is setting up because they want to take a specific action, you can place one of your meeples on that action, even though, you're only going to take perhaps a lesser version of it, but you're going to get bumped off and get that worker back and have it, again, spun up to a higher level. So that's an interesting level of interactivity that is maybe not so clear on the surface that I thought was interesting. Another bit of interactivity comes in response to an aspect of the game that might be a negative to some folks who play it. I mentioned that you can pick up tiles that give you abilities that make up your hive. Well, sometimes those tiles can be really, really strong or uniquely strong given the game state. And sometimes there's nothing you can do, and sometimes people just luck into a nice tile draw and they just jump on that spot and get these powerful tiles. But sometimes you have the ability to sort of get in there and either take that tile for yourself or place your worker there because somebody else is going to go in there and you get that free bump that I mentioned earlier. Or sometimes there's a couple different tiles that have popped out and people realize that having them combo together is really strong, and you might have to get in there to break up that combo and sort of just throw a monkey wrench into their plans. And so this was definitely a game where people knew they had to keep an eye on what their opponents were doing, which I really appreciated, and I appreciate in general with Euro games that you sort of force people to be attentive and they can't just do a head-down multiplayer solitaire sort of situation. I even mostly liked the aforementioned swingy tiles that I mentioned because it led to moments of excitement where you saw combos again, like I mentioned, that you might pull off. I know some people might think that these swinging tiles are bad, and I definitely see the argument, but sometimes it's fun. Like, oh, that came out, and I have this tile, and if I use them together, it really works. That was sort of like a spot of excitement. So in the end, I still think that Apiary is just about one of those Euro games that you see so often nowadays, but it's absolutely on the upper end of that spectrum, I would say. As I mentioned earlier, briefly, production and art are top-notch. That worker bumping and level adjustment thing is really interesting. And though you've seen it before in places like Teotihuacan, it still was a really fun aspect of the game. The game moves at a pretty nice clip. And while I think it's a game that can definitely be prone to AP, especially as the game nears its end, which comes at you really quick. That's another part of the game. Like, because the speed of the game, or the length of the game, I should say, is controlled by the player's actions, I found that the end always sort of jumps out at you, and those last turns, when you see the end is going to be coming up really quickly, can sort of be AP induced. But otherwise, it moves at a pretty decent clip. So a game I definitely enjoyed, though not enough to keep it off of my 4 trade list, but one that I would definitely play if it was suggested, and a game that I might even suggest myself if somebody wanted to play like a points-ality sort of Euro. And if that's the type of game that you're into, I would definitely suggest checking it out. So that was Apiary by Connie Vogelman and published by Stonemaier Games.
So your like net is that we would probably feel similarly or be it's too streamlined to whatever.
Yeah, I think we would like playing it, but I don't think we would necessarily ever just want to play it again, just because it's the best of that class, I would say. Like one of the best
like some
Euro-y points. Yeah, and some interaction and some like fun, crazy moments for sure, but not enough to make it have those edges that I think we would really, find ourselves gravitating towards.
Did you explain why it was bee-themed?
Why it was bee-themed?
Yeah. No, but like...
Well, yeah. I mean, so there's the hibernation thing, which, I mean, I guess bees don't even do hibernation, but there's like, I guess the space part is the hibernation thing. There's definitely the hive thing. So that's like the most bee part. And there's the resources. Like honey is the greatest resource, obviously. That's like the most rare resource.
You said it with disdain.
Yeah, well, I mean, so I would say that... The theme is not palpable. It's not a very super strong theme. It's an interesting theme, and the art makes it sort of evocative, but you don't feel like you're a space bee when you're playing it. At least I didn't. But it's fine. It sort of works, and I guess it helps teach the game. Although it's a pretty easy game to teach. It's not like you really need those like hooks to make it easier to teach. The game plays pretty quickly. It's pretty easy to teach. It does things well. It's a really, really solid points-ality sort of Euro, I would say.
I do like that. I feel like Stonemaier have been playing around with like the worker bumping for a while now, and this feels like the best possible version of that, where you actually have real trade-offs for bumping someone else's worker, which does, and that feels like an improvement. So
yeah, and again, whenever you get bumped, it is a positive. So there's always like a good feeling. You never, for folks who are averse to negative feelings when playing games, which I totally understand, being bumped in this game never really feels bad. I mean, I guess there are some rare circumstances.
I mean, if anything, it sounds like a big positive, right? If you're getting a higher strength.
Yeah, that's true. Yes, certainly.
Interesting.
All right, it's me. It's time to talk about the Wizards Cup. Auto Dueler. Okay, this is Neelan's favorite genre of board game. He loves challengers, okay? But what if we got rid of everything daft about challengers and made it 2-player only? And there's only like 18 cards for each side. What do you think about that, Mark? Huge upgrade, right? Huge.
Yeah, that sounds like all the fun of challengers.
Big.
But taken out.
No, Mark. No, you're on my side.
Oh, sorry.
So, yeah.
That's a mistake.
This is a new.
I was trying to be thematic to the episode.
Okay, great. A new thing from a new thing from Pandasaurus. This comes to us from Saiji Kanai. I'm sure I'm saying that wrong. The designer of Love Letter. So big pedigree. This has, I would say, incredible artwork. Very cool artwork. And you are auto battling, which if you're not familiar, you basically have a deck, you flip it over like war style, and then whoever wins that round, then you move on to the next. I mean, it's a video game genre, to be clear, and there have been board game adaptions. This is approaching a micro game adaptation of auto battling. This is on BGA as of now, I think, so good time for us to cover it. Essentially, you are building a deck of 6 wizards you know one of the 6 wizards in your opponent's deck, and then you get to choose all the wizards in your deck, and the order that they come out in, you set one aside to be your wizard in waiting. And that's thematic, Mark. Think about space beats, but now you can have a wizard in waiting. Then you literally will just flip one over, compare, right? You have immediate ability, special powers of the wizards, right? If that doesn't declare a winner, then you go to sort of an alignment chart that is very much a lot like Pokemon of fire beats earth. Earth beats this, but they all beat light, which loses to shadow. And I don't have the whole alignment chart. You get a little card with it. And then if an alignment has a win, that player will win. Then if you don't have a win in alignment, you will go to comparing the scores of the wizards. And then you will just keep flipping cards until a player has no more wizards to win, and then they will lose a third of the cup. Now, here's where it gets interesting, Mark. Because each player gets to swap out one of their 6 cards, but everybody has the same set of 18 cards, and then you get to reorder your cards in any order that you want. So you will know essentially 4 to 5 of the 6 cards in your opponent's deck. You'll only be able to change one of those cards, and then you'll need to try to reorder them in which to win the auto battler, and then you will battle again until someone has won 2 of the cups. There are multiple cups that you win, and it is Wizard's Cup, so I'm not sure about that on the aforementioned multiple cups. Okay, Neelan, why don't you go first?
Yeah, sure. So Kellen taught me this game, and I played it with someone else immediately. And I did like that we sort of could get through the rules in 5 minutes and we're immediately like auto battling. It's very silly. It is flip over a card, see if your wizard wins, then maybe try to hope that where their card in the deck is where you expect it to be in the deck. Change out one card between rounds. And to me, like, that's the real game. The real game is you play one dummy round. You kind of then start to think, okay, what's the one small tweak I can make to this deck that's going to give me the edge? And meanwhile, your opponent's doing that. And then you play a second round and do the same thing for third. Like, very simple premise, very cool idea. Definitely very silly. Probably may as well be random. And to be clear, like, I could say the same thing about challenges. I think ultimately a game of challenges comes down so much to luck, but I still would maintain that the deck building is like where the actual game in challenges is. I think that this tries to get there, but like it doesn't give you enough to like really, really mess with your opponent in a significant way.
Wrong. Big mistake. No, I do want to just read this 2 out of 10 review on BGG because I absolutely love it. Maybe it's just me who misunderstood it, ? You choose 6 cards, trying to imagine which ones the other player will choose. Then you put them in an order that you imagine will help you defeat the enemy. Then you just hope. Okay, there is a second round, but it's only a little less useless. Please ignore my rating if I misunderstood the game. 2 out of 10. Absolutely.
And you would agree with that, Kellen?
Oh no, not at all. I like this game. I don't
think it's
love this game. I think that the microgame genre is mostly bad. I think done with microgames, but the idea of just like building a deck that could trap Neelan now, it's like going all in on fire, going all in on one specific thing. I do feel like you could get to a place where even that first round feels more strategic. There are quite a few like 10 out of 10 reviews for this, Neelan. I know that's not going to like convince you, but it's sort of like a lot of that sort of, I've played 1,000 games and this one feels different. It's so cool. It's like Challengers. But Challengers is way more bloated than it ought to be. I would play this over Challengers any day of the week. Okay? Value. So I don't know where I'm at here. I think like these small, slight card games just don't work for me, even though like I don't really like Challengers and I would rather play this, to be honest with you. But again, that's because it's 10 minutes long. It's on BGA. You can try it. I think you should try it. It's certainly novel and I think is an interesting concept in that it sort of takes the micro games that you've probably played before, right? Like, and even this designer has ones like called Brave Rat or R. I don't know if you remember that like has a similar thing. It's just a bunch of people with powers, but now they're adding the auto battler like resolution to it in a way that I find just fun and interesting that like it's here. I don't know that I like it, but it does exist. It's on BGA. You should try it. Wizards Cup, it's interesting and also definitely better than Nealon's top 50 challengers. Where you have to imagine what the other player will do and then react to it.
Yeah.
There were other reviews that are just like, I'd rather play War, which I also find hysterical. And that is Wizards Cup. Again, 2 Wizards, 1 Cup. 1 winner.
Or 3 cups, apparently.
Yeah, that's the part I don't get because it's not plural, but that's okay. Nealon, what do you got for us?
Okay.
Oh, I know what you got for us.
We've got Wroth.
We've got.
Wroth is a newly fulfilled Kickstarter game from Chip Theory Games. So they are the publisher that is renowned for having very, I would say, overproduced games that like they're the kind of selling points, like all their materials are waterproof. They use a lot of neoprene mats. The cards are like generally made of plastic rather than paper. Very, very low, sort of over the edge of silliness in terms of like component production values. The art style for Wroth is this big, vibrant, colorful game. It is set in some sort of weird fancy world, and it is a very light area control game. In fact, the pitch for this, and the reason I backed it is a 60-minute light area control game that you can teach in about 15 minutes. And I would say all of that is accurate. We played back-to-back games of this, and those games were an hour long at 3 players, which is, to their credit, they did as advertised. The premise of the game, broadly speaking, is that you have a faction. These are asymmetric factions, and there is a little bit of Cthulhu Wars baked into this, where each faction has a number of specific units that they have access to, and each of those units has a special power, and a large part of the game is deciding when you're going to bring out those special units, which ones you're going to sort of focus on, and how you're going to utilize those on the board. The basic core of the game is one of dice drafting. So at the start of every round, you're going to roll a bunch of dice. So let's say in a 3-player game, you're going to roll 7 dice. You're going to choose an action die in turn order until you end up with 2 action dice. And those are going to dictate whether you're on your turns, your subsequent turns after all the dice have been drafted, whether you're going to be deploying troops, whether you're going to be moving them, attacking them, all that sort of thing. But as you can tell already, that's very slight. You are drafting 2 actions to take in a given round. You're going to be repositioning troops, killing some other players' troops, and then whoever is occupying each territory in the majority at the end of the round is going to score victory points for that territory. First person to 30 points ends the game. Whoever has the most victory points wins. Very, very simple premise. There is this concept of like mining a resource called Quora, which you use to spend on these elite troops. There is a couple of like interesting systems here where your basic troops are very limited, so you can only get a certain number of them out into the board. And the map, I would say, unfortunately, is one where there is not a whole lot of geography to it. Kind of almost everything seems to be connected to everything else. You put your people onto the map into this deployment zone, and then they can sort of move adjacently into 6 of the 8 territories on the game, and only a couple of them are more isolated. So it's very easy to get from one territory to the other. It is about jostling for majority over these regions, initiating these small-scale attacks to eliminate players from regions so that you can sort of maintain majorities, maintain dominance in order to get victory points. Very simple game. That is basically the heart of all of it. The core of it comes out in these asymmetries, in the ways that your units are going to turn the tide of the battle. So Kellen might have a unit, for example, that as it moves through the battlefield is pushing other units out of the way, or a unit that is setting traps, that as you enter into those territories, those traps are going off and dealing devastating effects to the opponent. So a lot of it is trying to sort of figure out how to uniquely use your units in a short amount of time to maximize your victory points. This game does end up playing over like the course of about, 5 or 6 rounds. Like it is that quick. You are moving up this victory point track very, very quickly. And sometimes you can, like games, like I associate this very heavily with stuff like Root and Arcs. You can have those rounds where you are just acquiring half of your victory point total in a single round. So like this actually happened in one of our recent games where someone comes from the very, very back. I'm not going to say who that someone is. Someone comes from the very, very back of the victory point track and makes it all the way to the end of the victory point track. And they feel very awesome and special because they did a special move, except they didn't do it quite right. We'll come back to that in a little bit. But that is both its like strength and its weakness. You have these big swingy moves that are possible. Loss. You have these big plays. But at the same time, that can feel very harsh, where someone who is trailing the pack throughout the whole game is able to then sort of have a massive turn that then turns the whole thing around in their favor. I would also argue that there is probably something baked into the design, which is something I haven't spoken about, which is an action you can take where instead of spending one of your action dice, you spend two of your action dice in order to do this big, what's called an Exodus move that allows you to sort of mass move a bunch of units from one space. And that led to kind of turn order problems where if you happen to be the player who is lost in the round because first player just rotates, you could be coming in with the final turn of a round, just doing this mass move that is sealing off all of the spaces in the map, taking control over things that can't be counted in a way that just allows you to accumulate a massive amount of victory points. And that happened enough times that it did genuinely feel like a problem. But all said, I think that this sort of lived up to the premise of a interesting, enticing, asymmetric area control game that genuinely played in about an hour's time. Kellen, what were your high-level thoughts on Wroth?
Yeah, I think to get to an area control game that is actually this distilled with asymmetric factions is something of a triumph, right? Like everybody like pretends like they can get there. You know, I was immediately reminded of like Rune Nation, which is another one with a kind of similar board that was like, we promise this is quicker. I don't think they promised it would be as quick as Wroth is, but there's just a lot to like about how it's distilled. Visually, loved it. Super interested. I like the dice as health points. You know, funny enough, for a game that was about dice as health points, like it often didn't feel like there was a lot of like attrition of the troops going from 5 health to 4 health and then from 4 health to 2 health. It felt a little like you were at full health or you got and you were dead.
Yeah, exactly. You either made a point to make like, either I'm going to deal enough damage to kill this elite or I'm just going to leave it on the board. So right. I agree. That didn't feel very significant.
The general thrust of the action selection of roll all the dice, then draft them, then play them, I really liked. I'm not convinced in a 3-player game, and I don't know how it scales. In a 3-player game, whoever's in last in the turn order track gets an extra action die. And I thought that combined extremely poorly with also just a rotating turn order situation. It had that sort of feeling of Cthulhu Wars where everyone knows you're going to build a gate, right? Everyone knows you're going to use one of your dice to just collect money here, but like you kind of want to stall out to see what other players are doing, right? And this game, the action economy is so tight and you basically can't do that you can end up in weird situations where one player gets to play last and they get 3 action cubes versus 2, and that's going to be a point swing of like 10 points. And the game only goes to 30. So I'm questioning some balance stuff after, multiple plays for us. I enjoyed it. But yeah, I think I'm probably maybe a little higher than you, but I also we did have in both games, it seemed like the winning or a winninger strategy in a 3-player game was just like not to engage and then have really massive turns later in the game, which I don't like. I do not like. And again, that's a balance thing that would have to be sort of proven out. But Nealon had one big massive turn where all of his troops were sort of like not even on the board or halfway on the board. Then he used the special Exodus action, put them everywhere, and then scored over half the points for the game and won the game. I guess that's the crux of this.
Didn't win the game, but yes, exactly.
Didn't win the game, but got extremely close to winning the game in one turn, which I just had me head scratching a little bit.
Yeah, totally. I do think that you've highlighted all the salient points that make that possible, which is there is that catch-up mechanism, ostensibly, which is the player who is furthest behind the VPs gets an extra action die, which makes it more enticing to do that Exodus to action, which especially if they're the last player in turn order, which is sort of semi-random based on how many rounds the game is going, does feel like this brutal, everything lined up in such a way that allowed someone to win kind of in a way that was out of control. It does contribute to things which I think are always problems in games like this, which is, 3-player problem is a real thing. Turtling is a real thing in games like this. I think the deployment zone is the perfect turtling opportunity because you cannot be targeted there. So you can just accumulate units until you get the opportunity to move them out onto the board. So that's not great. At the same time, it does just have that kind of sort of very quick wham, get in, get out, play. We played a great game. We want to roll it back again, where you don't feel too hurt by the fact that it didn't quite feel super, super fair. So it's riding a really weird line where I think, to Callan's point, it's not my flavor of area control game, but I don't necessarily love Root either, which is, I think, a okay comparison for the sort of the scale of this type of game. Yeah, I think this is interesting. I think it's worth saying that I'm planning on keeping it around because I think that the four of us will have a good time with it the next time that we're together. I would like to hang on to it, just certainly to give it a proper bash with all four of us. But I don't necessarily have super high hopes that it's one that I'm going to keep coming back to over and over again beyond that. But yeah, I think it's a lovely production. I think that the faction asymmetry is at least interesting, quite varied between the factions in terms of how they play and what their units are capable of, which I think is always fun, even if it is maybe questionable from a balance perspective. But yeah, that is Wroth by Chip Theory Games. One quick thing in the middle before we move on is another call out for our listener top 20 episode. We are probably going to be doing this next episode, so you have another 2 weeks or so to get your lists in. As a reminder, you can go to boardgamebarrage.com/top20 and please be copying and pasting your titles exactly as they appear on Board Game Geek into that form. However you want to do your top 20 is up to you, but if you've not used PubMeeple before, that's a pretty good starting point to kind of get some ranked order to your lists. But yeah, if you've already have your top 20 ready to go, then go ahead and add it into our submission form at boardgamebarrage.com/top20, and we'll give you the accumulated data of what the listeners of this great podcast love in the board game world.
All right, so we are going on to our feature topic, which is Are Mistakes Fun in Board Games? And we did want to start at the top to, I don't know the exact quote from our friends at So Very Wrong About Games, but I do know they are big proponents of mistakes are fun, they make the game faster.
Mistakes are interesting. I think yeah.
Oh, is that?
I think they've often said as mistakes are interesting. Yeah, I don't know, but that for whatever reason, that's what's rolling around in my head, which I think that's a good premise to come in with as the core conceit here. I do think, because we teased earlier, let's unpack a little bit what happened in our game of Wroth here, which is basically, Mark, what sort of had happened, let's call it halfway through one of our games of this, where, we got to the point where a person at the table, a friend, had realized that they had kind of made a mistake and they had not utilized one of their action dice in the appropriate way. Could we roll it back? Could they undo it? Would this affect people at the table? How much far would we have to roll back? All of that. And it became this kind of a little bit of a philosophical conversation about oh yeah, we generally are okay with that depending, but then maybe we shouldn't be. How much are we willing to slow down a game for the sake of fixing mistakes? And when this resurfaced again later, we had kind of decided, no, let's make a collective effort to just say roll with mistakes. Let that be kind of the process for this game. Until it came to bite me in the ass in particular, where on this incredible, potentially game-winning turn, I noticed one small mistake that took me from, it would have been 29 points to win the game to the 30 points I needed to instantly win the game. And it was literally just one small stupid thing I did literally without anyone interceding in between. It was the last action of the round. I made a small mistake, but we moved on to the next phase where we were calculating victory points. I didn't think it was actually possible that I was going to win, and we were kind of all collectively surprised to see me climb up the victory point track to 29. And then it just became this funny moment where, to be clear, I was not upset because we had agreed, no, we're going to stick with it. I made the mistake. Let's play it out. But it did become this thing where the other player then was like, no, that's dumb. We should just say that you won. It's obvious that we, if we had all caught that, we would have corrected it. And it seems silly for your incredible game winning turn to be muted by the fact that you made one small mistake. So the thing I would pose to you
did not win the game.
Question. No, I did not win the game in the subsequent round, to be clear. Where would you have landed in that situation kind of broadly? I did lose the game. Broadly kind of as described, Mark, what's your reaction to that? How that had played out? Thank you.
I think it is definitely a table-by-table situation in general. Especially if you haven't talked about it earlier, you sort of have to figure out the players you're playing with in the situation and figure it out on the fly and sort of the vibe of the game. In general, I'm fine with rolling stuff back, especially if no new information has come out. And honestly, I'm usually especially okay with rolling stuff back, like the crucial turn that you're referring to, because I think in general, I would rather a game be a little slower than have someone else have bad feelings about their play. Now, I want to be clear, if it was, and this is not a slight at Neelan at all, because in that situation, I would say to Neelan, I would say, roll it back and you won the game. That's how I would prefer to do it. Me personally, like if that had happened to me, in general, I'm totally fine with like just accepting it and moving on. Like I'm like, okay, I messed up. It's my fault. Let's move on. But in general, I don't want the table to feel bad about a small mistake that ruined their experience. I think that's where I land in that specific situation.
Yeah, there is, not to muddy the things at all, but there is one confounding element to this, which I do think like influenced my decision a little bit. And to be clear, and I hope Kellen like reads this as genuinely as I intended, which is I was 100% fine being like, I didn't win, let's play another round. Part of that was, I think, maybe predicated by the fact that like it did look like I still had a good board position, like it was likely I was going to go on to win. But regardless, it was because we had this conversation beforehand. And secondly, I really didn't feel good about the come from clear behind to then win in one turn. Like I wouldn't have loved that to be the story of the game regardless. So I felt comfortable being like, no, let's play it out, you know? It was funny specifically because this is all born out of literally a conversation which I think is very important to like our context, which I would say generally when the four of us are playing games together, we are very comfortable with the idea of just saying like, oh, let's work through what we could have done differently. Let's find the best possible version of your turn together.
So then we can definitively answer, are mistakes fun? Neelan, was that fun? Did you have fun?
I genuinely think I would have felt worse about the game afterwards if I had rolled it back and won. I think that is true.
But not because you're talking about because you're a little concerned about the balance of the game, your ability to score that many points. Or would you say some of it is the fact of rolling it back and then winning also feels sheepish to you?
I think that's kind of what
more
I mean.
The second
it kind of feels like, yeah, exactly. It was like if you guys let me roll it back just so I could win, that would make me feel uncomfortable, like socially, honestly. Like,
yeah,
you know,
it's kind of like that's the kind of thing that I'm totally comfortable rolling back in the first turn of a game, you know, because it's like, oh, it's the first turn of a splatter game and you didn't pick the 3 white ones. Oh, ha ha ha! Mistakes are fun. Get for 2 hours, you know, whereas like there's scaling effects to it versus at the end of the game where it's like where is the game if you can't not do that, because that like to whatever degree is like we're all making, you know, 17 decisions each turn about where to attack, what to attack with, and you know, I wasn't doing the math, you know, and you weren't doing the math, and so that's the counterplay is that, you know, I want you to go quick, so I don't want you to sit there and have to do the math, and I do feel like had you thought you could win, the turn would have taken 3 times as long, and you probably would have.
And that's exactly it. If I had done the maths in it, so part of the context here is I did not think I was capable of winning on that turn until we literally said, okay, my turn's over, let's figure out how many victory points I got. And then I saw I was 1 short. And then I looked at the board and was like, well, if I just hadn't done this, I would have had that extra point. So like, yes, we could have got there if I had taken the time to do the maths, but I agree, that wouldn't have been fun either. Like me sort of sitting there and calculating, is it possible for me to win, and then going through every permutation until I find a way to win, that wouldn't have, I mean, it probably would have been easier than I'm even implying based on the fact that it was just one small move away, but like, I don't think that would have been fun for anyone at the table. And I do think that the best possible version of this is some sort of middle ground where we are allowing people to make mistakes, people are being graceful about the mistakes they're making, but at the same time, that is not leading to plays where people feel really, truly upset by those mistakes. And I think that is a hard balance to strike, and it is going to be so subjective to the people at the table, for sure.
Yeah, and so when we talk about mistakes being fun, I don't think this is the type of mistake we're talking about. This feels a little like a gotcha,
totally.
Either way. You know, the gotcha is, oh, Neelan should have won the game. We had another situation in the same game around sort of like, how much can you attack me there for? And then like it not being the exact amount. And I didn't end up taking it back.
No, we ended up just rolling with it as well, but that ended up being another conversation of like, well, if I had known you could do that much damage. To be clear, no one at the time realized this player, even that player themselves, did not realize they could do that much damage until it got to their turn. They're like, oh, actually, I think I can just kill all of your units. And it was like, and we were all just like, okay, well, we probably wouldn't have, but we rolled with it because, you know, I do think you have to allow for that, especially part of the context of this conversation as well is like specifically around the idea of like asymmetric games. Like part of the game in any big heavy asymmetric game, or even, you know, not heavy asymmetric game, is awareness of what everyone is capable of doing. And that's not information that you can perfectly keep in your head at all times. So there's always going to be some element of like, oh, but my unit's special power means I can do this. And if you were correcting for every time someone forgot that, that would be obviously absurd. So It's delicate.
It certainly is. And I think figuring out on a game, because it's a group-by-group basis, but then it's also a game-by-game basis, right?
Game-by-game basis, exactly, yeah.
And I think that...
Because I think we can all agree that, like, abstracts, like we brought up chess as an example, that would like destroy the game of chess.
Right, but I also don't feel particularly good in a game of chess when I get gotcha'd, right? Like, it doesn't feel like... It feels like I made a dumb blunder. You know, if I get got by like a move that they set up 17 turns in the past, like I'm in awe and I'm excited. But if I just like accidentally move my piece into a way that a pawn gets me and they go gotcha, and I'm like, well, I'm just an idiot. You know what I mean? Like maybe in speed chess I would be okay with that, but in a game of chess I would not say that mistake was fun. I think that the spirit of this is like, you know, what does perfect play look like, and is perfect play boring? And then, you know, maybe unique and weird situations can happen when you allow for less than perfect play or less than like perfectly strategic play. But again, I think there are many games that don't even work with the fuzziness of like, let's map out every player's turn every round, and then suddenly like you're not even playing the game, let's call it.
Right.
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned the chess analogy, because I think, and I've argued this before, I think on the show as well, but I think the best way to play board games in general, period, would be with a chess clock. And I think the way I've said to people, like the way that I want to play games is with a chess clock for everybody, and whoever has the longest time automatically loses. It doesn't work in all games, but that would be my preferred way of doing it, because I agree that making mistakes makes for a more interesting game. The problem there is that I think the competitiveness and the wanting to win a game is important, at least for me, for playing a game. And I'm all for everybody playing quickly to, like, you know, encourage a quicker game, and B, like interesting situations, interesting scenarios. But that only works if everybody is on board and doing it. And if you say that, but people actually at some points like play more slowly or like take a turn where they're really calculating, it's like a gray area of like, okay, wait, what are we doing? Like now all of a sudden, like you are taking that advantage to try to win, and we had this agreement, but how solid was the agreement? Like what does that agreement even mean to play quicker? Because unless you're going to be sitting there like enforcing the, hey, we're all playing fast rule, which is awkward, I don't think it really works. Like unless it's your thing, like if it's your personal thing, like I want to play fast and I'm happy with like whatever outcome results, that's fine. But I think, at least for me, and I think games in general, the going for a win is and should be important, and leaving it to like, oh, let's just all gentleman's agreement, we're going to play fast, is not enough for me. Although I understand the appeal to those like weird situations, but I think there needs to be like enforced nature, or again, just doesn't really work in my opinion.
Here's my counterpoint, and
yes,
I'm bearing in mind this is the counterpoint that benefits me, right?
Yeah.
Which is, this is something I even said during our game as we were discussing this, which is I think that any resolution to say everyone should play quicker and be happy with mistakes disadvantages Christina and I in particular, because we are the two slower players without question. I'm not going to speak for Christina in any capacity here. I am not a good fast thinker. Like that is not, I consider myself a smart person, but I have a very deliberate way of working through problems, which I think is very different from how you and Kellen both play, which I do think that you are both good at making good snap decisions. And I do think that is a mode of thought that definitely disadvantages me in the context of, you know, slowest player loses, which is which is hard.
To be clear, like in that case, my default in general would be, let's just play as we play and let's have people think. But if that is an issue, I'm very binary here. Let's play games normally and people take their time, and let's just do it and have things land where they may. But if we're going to play, if we're going to encourage quick play, there has to be a
let's do it
enforcement way. There can't be like a let's just say this. You know what I mean?
No, I agree with you. Like it's very easy to say that and then just not really act on it in like any meaningful way.
Right.
But,
or maybe you're acting on it in a meaningful way throughout the course of the game, and then one very important turn you don't, and then it's like it muddles the competitiveness and this tacit agreement that you sort of have. But I think we're probably straying away from the topic maybe a little bit.
I feel like that would be really fun in very like non-interactive Euro games. It's just whoever thinks longest loses. Like I would love to implement that. I don't know, Neelan, though, that your like sort of criteria like that would hurt me the most. It's sort of like any game we play with any type of spatial thinking hurts me the most. Do you know what I mean?
That's a valid point. I think that's a very valid point. I think part of actually maybe the counterpoint, which I think you're suggesting, is that, there are games that I have an advantage at. There are games that you guys have an advantage at. And that's the nature of games.
Yeah.
And that I should be comfortable of just rolling with that and making do. And to be clear, I'm not of the opinion that I like take excruciating long turns anymore. Like I feel like some of that has something that we've tried gradually addressed over the course of time. But like I do still think that is just a product of the way that I think about things.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, moving back to mistakes being fun or interesting, how do you, and we've probably talked about this in different ways, like where are you at currently, because some of this morphs and shifts, with like allowing newer players, like how many mistakes do you allow them to make at the beginning of a game, or what are you giving them watch-outs for? And I know, Mark, before you say it's game dependent, Kellen, give us a general thing and give us your philosophy.
My philosophy is I will give unlimited take-backs, especially to newer players. I will do unlimited.
But will you tell them what they're doing is dumb?
If it's blatant and it's early, then I will. I know for sure that I've done that multiple times for somebody just playing a game for the first time, saying, oh, just realize that if you do that, you're leaving yourself open for this sort of potential issue later on. I will definitely do that less as the game goes on. Hopefully they are getting where their mistake is sort of originating from. And I think that has been the case. Like you just give people a heads up, like, oh, this is, just so you know, this is clearly potentially a mistake. And I think generally they cotton on to that. But in terms of number of times I will call things out, like I can't think of many times where I've called out the same issue more than once, because usually people, again, figure it out and don't do it. I think if somebody was making the same mistake more than once, I would do it once or twice and then just take advantage of their mistake and just say, okay, well, if they didn't get it, then they're going to get screwed here, and that's fine. But and in terms of number of takebacks in general, I think usually if I'm playing with somebody who's new, especially new to gaming in general, and they want to take back an action, I will usually say like, oh, that's fine. Just so you know, like, as long as no new information has come up, usually there's no issue with taking back a turn. But if some new information has come up, generally we don't do a rollback.
The one that I love the most is the people who are sticklers for like, you generated one read last turn that you forgot to grab. And they're like, no, can't possibly go back. That was then, this is now. And you're like, what are you talking about? Like,
yeah.
And Daniel, friend of the podcast who we're playing with, brought up like, some of these feel like on BGA, right? When the game's like, are you sure you want to do this? You still have an action left or whatever, like the warnings that BGA has, and like, do those exist for any of the games you have? I thought that was kind of an interesting framework. Like, if BGA would warn you, like, this is an idiotic thing to do, is that when you should be warning people, and that's not the type of mistake that could be fun or interesting?
Totally. But I think the thing that's also funny about that situation is, like, had one of, not to get into specifics about when this came up, but had one of us noticed, hey, you forgot to use your die, we almost certainly would have pointed it out. But by the time it got back to his turn, it was too late, and there was no good way to correct that. But that was one of those exact cases where, like, BGA would have been like, don't end your turn, you idiot, you still have this,
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think in general, I'm not sure that I think that mistakes are interesting or fun. I do get the sense that like playing faster and looser is probably for the best of most groups, and that I do like games when they go sideways, like when something like super weird happens, which is often like, I feel like I often attempt to provoke that sometimes intentionally, right? Where I'd like try to hoard a resource or just do something that, like feels a little weird or degenerate, just to like force everything to react to it. But I'm not convinced that like just like blunder. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know where I'm at here.
I think in general, games being played quicker is better in general. Depends on the game, depends on the group, of course. But I think in general, philosophy of like playing any game is like, if it's faster, it's better. Like if I had two game experiences that were, for all intents and purposes, the same, but one was 30 minutes faster than the other, I would always go for the quicker one. And so, therefore, in some ways, encouraging quicker gameplay is better. And I think it does allow for, if the time pressure is there, then there is a out that everybody has for explaining a mistake away. You weren't dumb for making a mistake. You were under pressure. Like, it's not really as much your fault because you were under the gun. You were under the clock. And so when you give people that explanation, and that, it's not like a fake explanation, it's actually true. Like, you are under pressure. You give them like a release, give them an out. And also you're getting like game situations that you might not normally see when people are trying to play as perfectly as possible. And you're playing games quicker. You know, you're playing a second game or a third game that you wouldn't not necessarily play because the game was taking longer. And you probably have a more engaged experience too. If everybody's playing under time pressure and making mistakes, you're having more attentive play, more like, you know, people watching what's going on. So, you know, I think in general, there are good things about encouraging quicker, mistake-prone play, but there are also, again, a lot of drawbacks. Like, you would also potentially get a lot of bad feelings from people who made a mistake because of time pressure, and that ruins their experience as well. So there's a lot of, like, you know, give and take for sure.
I do have a theory that I've not necessarily like put into practice yet, which is that the pain you feel at making a mistake and like, oh, you blundered and messed up, is a mindset that can be unlearned. And like, I do think that like by forcing yourself to just be comfortable with saying, no, I'm not going to take that back. No, I'm not going to roll that back. No, I'm just going to live with the things. You will eventually get to the point where you're just genuinely more comfortable with making a mistake, even if they're like game losing mistakes, and just like you're saying, Mark, being comfortable being, whatever, we'll just roll into another game. Like, I'll beat you on the next one if you could just get into the second game versus the one that you spent all night deliberating over every like small move. And to be clear, that is something I'm almost like proposing to myself, is like, hey, get to the point where you're not hung up on like mistakes because you didn't have the time to think through every possibility.
I just think that's a dangerous road to, you know, not even caring about winning and being like, I'm only here to push buttons and see how the system works. And like, I find that like entirely abhorrent.
I think there's a middle ground. I think there's a middle ground where like I still, it is a dangerous slip slope. And to be clear, like even some of this was something I was thinking the other day, which is like, well, should I care that I could have won and I'm not fighting harder about it? What does that say about me? You know, but like, I don't know. Ultimately, at the end of the day, like I'd rather we all be having fun than
ultimately
being hyper focused on the win.
So
I didn't exactly.
we wouldn't have let you take it back.
Yeah, exactly.
And caring about winning is the most important thing. Trying to win.
If that's the main takeaway.
Listen, it's not about exploring the system, blah blah blah. You gotta want to win. You know what I mean? But that does make then the tryhard like of, oh, you didn't collect your cow and now you can't have it, even though like literally nothing has happened and it's just 6 seconds. Like Neelan started describing like the phases to me, and like I was like, what is this conversation? He was, because you're going through it, Mark, right? And I was like, no, the phase of placement has ended and we are now in phase 6 scoring. So we can't go back.
I was trying to justify it. I was trying to like justify it to myself. Like, no, I agreed that my turn was over, so we should treat it as over. Like, we were totaling up victory points, like in the following phase. You know, it's like in my head that made sense as like no, we're past the point of no return. So I'm okay with that. But I agree.
No.
It's a very silly framing point.
I agree. We were trying to like unpack it. But the other thing is, like, you had just gotten to see how all 17 regions scored except for that one.
Well, exactly. I basically used the phase to do the maths and realize, oh, here's the mistake I could have corrected. You know,
I don't know. Yeah. It's mistakes. We just don't make very many of them, so that's why we're not versed on this topic. You know what I mean?
Exactly. That's why it's taken us 300 episodes.
For sure.
Just very rarely happens.
That's right. And that is going to do it for this episode about mistakes. Where are they? Never heard of them. Never seen them. And we covered the Space Bees game where the humans have died. We covered the Wizards Cup game. That's definitely not an inappropriate internet meme. And we covered the Wroth, the sneezing Gesundheit game.
Are we summing up episodes?
We did it all.
Yeah.
What did we learn, Kellen? What's the
And the lesson we learned along the way is compete or get
great.
Thank you and good night. We don't have to thank the band anymore. The band is dead. We are the band. We carry this torch past them. Thank you, the listener. I could do a summary of the episode. What do you mean I can't do a summary of the episode?
We've just never done it.
I think it's important.
You tell them what they're going to hear. You let them hear it, and then you tell them what they heard. Have you ever heard of this?
No, that's great. I love it.
Storytelling.
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 Exactly.
Thank you and good night.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
What? Why are you laughing? You gotta let. We gotta
Perfect.
stop.
No,
Yeah.
you're right. No, I love it. It's perfect.
All right. Good.
Mistake free.
Mistake. Yeah. Oh, there was no mistakes there.
No mistake.
Okay. Bye.